This is a strategic infrastructure model rooted in Islamic ethics, designed for real-world implementation and engineered to sever the lifelines of dependency that keep communities trapped in that global economic prison. Each zone would be structured around a set of core infrastructure pillars, all of which are geared towards one foundational goal, which is baseline autonomy with moral integrity. These aren't just survival mechanisms. These are expressions of sovereignty. These are manifestations of sovereignty. So, for example, energy microgrids, either solar or hybrid, because no sufficiency is even possible, really, without energy independence. So you need centralized grids that are not vulnerable to sabotage or to blackmail or to price manipulation and supply chain fragility. Sufficiency zones would deploy solar-powered microgrids, optionally integrated with wind or biofuel systems, scaled for local consumption. These are decentralized and modular, reducing systemic vulnerability. Community-owned, not corporate-controlled, designed for local prioritization, meaning prioritized for agriculture, water, refrigeration, communication, not for luxury or waste. Energy becomes a right, or is treated like a right. Then you need hydro-independent water systems, harvesting, purification, and so forth. Water is the first condition of life itself, and it's the first point of control in any system of subjugation. So a sufficiency zone would rely on independent water systems, including rainwater harvesting networks, solar desalination or filtration units, gravity-fed distribution channels, and local reservoirs. The goal is to never be dependent on municipal grids or foreign engineered infrastructure for access to drinking water, or for irrigation, or for sanitation. Water doesn't need to be monetized. It's a protected trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, distributed with fairness and guarded against contamination and guarded against privatization. And then, of course, you need agro-sovereignty, agricultural sovereignty. Food sovereignty is not just about what you grow, but why you grow it and for whom. So a sufficiency zone would prioritize permaculture techniques, low input, regenerative, climate-appropriate farming, community-based seed banks to reject GMO dependency, local staples over export crops, with ceilings on exportation of essential goods to prevent resource leakage. The objective is to feed the community first, not the commodity markets. And then in terms of exchange, trust-based exchange systems, non-interest, ledger-based, or tokenized. A sufficiency zone cannot operate or cannot survive if its economy is tethered to fiat volatility or to interest-bearing debt systems. It has to operate on a parallel exchange logic where value is circulated, not extracted. There are a lot of potential models you could use. Non-interest bearing mutual credit systems, digital tokens or physical coupons that are pegged to either time or labor or to staple value, ledger-based local accounting, publicly visible to ensure transparency and to ensure trust. There's no place for riba. There's no place for hoarding. There's no space for speculation. Trade is real, ethical, and bound by mutual obligations. In this, we return to the spirit of the souk in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Decentralized, transparent, and just. You know, in many parts of post-colonial Africa, especially in rural areas that were abandoned or that were exploited by international financial institutions, communities actually created their own systems of mutual finance and resource circulation, not because of ideological rejection of capitalism, but just out of necessity. That was their situation. You know, so you'd have rotating savings and credit associations, groups where members would contribute to a communal pot on a rotating basis. You had village banks and cooperative funds that were locally governed pools of capital to be used for small loans, used for emergencies, used for farming inputs, or petty trade. Informal labor sharing pacts, where work, where tools, where harvests are exchanged without money, but through trust and reciprocity. These types of systems operate outside of the formal banking sector, often in regions where there is no commercial bank whatsoever anyway. And they are immune to fluctuations in interest rates, credit rating downgrades, or IMF mandates. They keep value circulating within the community rather than leaking out to external shareholders. Most importantly, these informal economies are moral economies. You know, Default was rare, not because there was collateral, but because they were embedded in the community. Reputation mattered more than credit scores among your own neighbors. Transactions weren't monitored by institutions, but by neighbors, by your fellow people in the community. So what does that show you? Resilience is not born from scale, it's born from cohesion. The sufficiency zone idea draws directly from this principle. Build small, but build near and build together, and you will build strong. Labor would not be governed by supply and demand in a sufficiency zone, but by dignity and decency. No one is allowed to exploit desperation. Key rules could be, for example, maximum wage gaps. There should be a limit on how much more one person can earn compared to another person in the same organization, in the same endeavor. There should be mandatory rest, mandatory health care, mandatory workplace protection. No zero-hour contracts, no gig exploitation, no coercion. Transparent hiring practices overseen by a local shura to guard against nepotism, to guard against discrimination. Work is not a transaction, it's an act of amana. You know, the employer is accountable not only to the worker, but to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the community. Now, in terms of governance, obviously sufficiency zones would not be authoritarian enclaves or communes. They're just ecosystems voluntarily participated in, ecosystems that are run by Islamic principles, by shura, by accountability, and by trust. Decision making is consultative, not dictatorial. It would be voluntary participation. No one would be coerced into joining. No one would be coerced into remaining in their participation. Participation is by choice. You could have halal certification, not just for food, but for economic behavior. You know, a product might be halal in ingredients, but haram in production, in its ethics in production. In a sufficiency zone, the entire process has to be clean, from origin to output. The zone is not a utopian model. It is a disciplined, morally coherent, practical model of non-captive economic life. And it's not for everyone, sure. But for those who are done trying to negotiate with their jailers, it's the beginning of a way out. This is how we distribute the practical work of sovereignty, from the state to the people, from the people to the state, without undermining the state itself. And that, once it is achieved, is not just liberation. It's a new foundation for lasting national strength. For proof of concept, there are real-world precedents that demonstrate the power of strategic sufficiency. I mean, we can look at Cuba after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, they faced an existential economic crisis. With the loss of subsidized oil, the loss of machinery, loss of fertilizers, their agricultural system was highly industrialized and it collapsed. Food imports plummeted by 80%. Hunger spread rapidly. But instead of surrendering to starvation or to neoliberal rescue, so-called, Cuba initiated profound internal transformation. Urban agriculture took over public and private land, with over 200,000 urban farms emerging in Havana alone. Permaculture, ox-driven farming, organic methods replaced imported industrial techniques and so forth. State incentives empowered local cooperatives and decentralized food distribution networks. And within a decade, Cuba was producing most of its fruits and vegetables domestically, without any reliance, or with very little reliance on imported chemicals, fuels, or Western agri-corporations. Or you can look at Iran, for example, under decades of sanctions. They've been locked out of the international banking system. They've been restricted from exporting oil and constantly targeted by diplomatic and financial warfare. Yet despite this, Iran has invested heavily in domestic energy production, including renewables and decentralized grids and regional pipelines. They developed local technologies and engineering capacities, not just for oil and gas, but for nuclear, solar, and hydroelectric energy. They established even barter-based trade agreements with regional allies and with BRICS states to try to circumvent Western currencies. Iran's focus has not only been on trying to survive sanctions, but on structuring its economy to be less vulnerable to sanctions. You understand? Energy sufficiency became a matter of national defense for them, not just economic growth. You can feel any way you want to about Iran, but they have shown that you can actually turn economic coercion into fuel for economic autonomy. Resilience is not what you build when things are stable, it's what you build because things are not stable. And by all measures, we have to admit that Iran has done an outstanding job of building a resilient system. Or you can look at Turkey. Over the past 20 years, Turkey has been quietly but decisively redrawing the contours of its economic sovereignty. What we're seeing is not an abandonment of globalization, so-called, but the deliberate construction of strategic autonomy, a recalibration of the terms of engagement with the global system. One of the most visible expressions of this has been the nationwide rollout of organized industrial zones, OIZs they call them, which are purpose-built hubs of domestic production, each specializing in sectors like textiles, automotive, and most critically, defense. These are not just industrial parks. These are battlegrounds of economic independence that are engineered to anchor national industries and to eliminate structural dependency on Western supply chains. You see, Turkey's investment in local defense manufacturing has been remarkable. They've gone from just 20% self-sufficiency in 2002 to 80% in 2023. That's not just a shift, that's a transformation. Turkey is decoupling intelligently. Public-private partnerships have been structured not around maximizing shareholder profit, but around maximizing national capacity. They're putting their people first, their nation first. Now, their goal isn't to exit the global economy, but to try to negotiate with the global economy from a position of internal strength. Yes, the West has punished them for that. But even that punishment, like with Iran, is just helping to train the long-term system for becoming unpunishable. In essence, Turkey is developing a blueprint for what might be called pragmatic economic nationalism, a model that combines integration with insulation, openness with control. It's not about rejecting the world, again. It's about refusing to be ruled by the external world, by the outside world, by the West. It's not a sufficiency zone per se, but it demonstrates what's possible. You don't have to actually sever all ties to the world. You only have to sever ties to that part of the world that will use those ties to tie you up, that will try to hold you hostage. So you can have ties with others. You can have ties with other countries. And those are the only ones that you should have. Because if you're going to have ties with countries that are going to use those ties to tie you up and to bind you, well, then you don't need to be tied to those countries. Now, yes, of course, in these cases, the cases that I've talked about, these are all coming from the top down. These are all driven by state policy. It's national strategy. But it affirms the principle, because Turkey, what Turkey and Iran and Cuba have demonstrated is a model of sufficiency that can be mirrored at the grassroots level. The logic is the same. It's about refusing captivity. It's about severing the arteries of dependence, whether we're talking about the connections to foreign lenders or to multinational suppliers, whether it's a government establishing organized industrial zones like Turkey, or a community creating local production hubs. The core idea remains the same. Build what you need, control what you use, and rely on your own. I mean, you're going to need approval from the government to one extent or another, but really what we're talking about is just community building in the most practical sense imaginable. Literally, communities taking care of each other and taking care of themselves. All you need is intention, coordination, and vision. Neighborhoods can become sufficiency zones. Villages can become nodes of resilience. Cooperatives, collectives, and micro-enterprises can replicate the same pattern of localization. Food, energy, tools, skills, developed and circulated within. Every act of self-sufficiency, whether it's by a nation or by a neighborhood, is a blow against the system of economic captivity. It is possible to survive without submission. You can do it. You can decentralize. You can localize. And you can prioritize internal needs over export incentives. You can refuse to build your future around the demands of foreign investors or colonial institutions. Cuba proved it with food. Iran has proved it with energy. And Turkey is proving it with industry. Sufficiency zones are just community-level application of the same principle. Every economic order produces a kind of geography. Not just the physical geography in the sense of borders and trade routes and so forth, but in how power flows, how wealth concentrates, how legitimacy is distributed. So today, the geography of power is mapped not by states, but by financialized capital. Transnational, unaccountable, a-national, fundamentally. It obeys no constitution, it answers to no electorate, and it operates entirely outside of any moral framework. This is the geography drawn by the OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. Their territories are not countries. Their territories are supply chains, regulatory bodies, debt portfolios, digital infrastructure. Do you understand? If they control your supply chain, then that chain controls you. If they regulate your trade, then they rule you. If you are in their debt portfolio, then they own you. If you rely on their digital infrastructure, well, then they are your whole interface with the world. And they can decide not only what you can say, but what you can even hear and what you can even learn and what you can even know. Not to mention, they will know everything about you. The OCGFC thrive on centralization, on consolidation. Their power grows through aggregation of resources, of data, of currencies, and aggregation of markets. It needs everything to flow through it, through its platforms, through its banks, through its payment systems, through its institutions. Do you see? Sufficiency zones, the idea of that interrupts that flow. They divert the current, functionally and irreversibly. Every local water system that doesn't rely on global infrastructure, every food network that operates outside of the agro-commodity futures market is a rupture in the monopolized geography of capital. And once there are enough of them, potentially, they can begin to form networks of mutual reinforcement through interzone trade, for example. A farming zone in Senegal trades food with a solar energy zone in Egypt. A textile production cluster in Turkey trades with an agro-industrial sufficiency zone in Pakistan, and so on. These linkages are not based on competitive advantage, but on cooperative survival and mutual fortification. They're not conducted in dollars. The trade isn't conducted in dollars, but trust-based exchange mechanisms, shared commodity baskets, or mutual credit systems. You're talking about an ecosystem within the broader economy interacting with another ecosystem in another country. Or even you can have zones that cross borders, like I said, where communities that share similar resources and similar population characteristics can cooperate with each other. This becomes a sort of counter-geography that's not one defined by colonial maps and trade routes and IMF trade corridors, but zones of voluntary cooperation, ethical regulation, connecting sufficiency economies. And as these links form, they begin to do something subtle but powerful. They rewire the flow of legitimacy away from the institutions of empire and towards the communities that are functioning without those institutions. This is what sovereignty looks like in the 21st century. The ability to feed yourself, the ability to power your homes yourselves, the ability to treat your sick yourselves, and the ability to teach your children your own civilization and your own understanding. And the ability to refuse dependency on Western systems without triggering the collapse of your own society. Yes, the OCGFC would not see this project as a benign project. And it wouldn't be tolerated at all by the empire. Why? Because sufficiency zones, the idea of it, sabotages their whole model in 5 key ways. 1, it reduces critical dependencies. The OCGFC survives by making sure that nothing essential, water, energy, food, money, so on, none of that can be accessed without going through them. They control water through massive infrastructure. They control energy through centralized grids. They control food through patented seeds and global shipping. They control finance through debt-bound currencies, through interest-based systems, and so forth. Sufficiency zones break that control. Every locally generated kilowatt, every homegrown meal, every interest-free exchange severs a link in their chain. This is not just about decentralizing, it's about ending captivity, like I said. Number 2, they create silent strongholds of resistance. One of the most subversive aspects of a sufficiency zone is that they do not declare war. They don't provoke military action. They don't wave a flag or demand recognition. They just function. And in functioning, they expose that the dominant system is not necessary. That's the real threat, just walking away. Just walking away is the real threat. You can't bomb a movement that doesn't even confront you. You can't sanction a community that no longer depends on you. Sanction them with what? The OCGFC can't fight what quietly replaces it. Number 3, a sufficiency zone collapses the illusion of monopoly legitimacy. The biggest asset of monopoly capital is the belief that you have no choice. that development must mean IMF loans, that jobs must mean foreign investment, that progress must mean Western alignment. Well, a sufficiency zone destroys that illusion. Each functioning community disproves that lie. Each network of trade that bypasses the empire rewrites the script. Each school, each clinic, each farm, each hospital says we can live without them. And as more and more people step out, then that myth unravels. What used to be the standard starts to look outdated. This is the long war. And we don't win that war by protesting. We win it by building. We win it by building what they said we needed them to build for us. Number 4, they reverse, like I said, the flow of influence. Normally, all influence runs one way, from empire to periphery. The OCGFC set the norms: what we wear, what we eat, how we teach, what we teach, how we build, what we build. Every part of life becomes a downstream effect of their culture, of their systems, of their approval. But when people begin living sustainably and with dignity outside of that system, well, the current changes. Suddenly it's not the empire that people want to imitate. It's the communities that broke free from the empire. Then the periphery stops looking backwards towards the so-called center and starts looking sideways to each other. And then you realize that you are the center, learning, adapting, improving together. This undermines the soft power and the cultural dominance and the myth of superiority of the West. And once that spell breaks, well, the empire's grip loosens, not just economically, but psychologically. And number 5, sufficiency zones make collapse survivable for us, not for them. The OCGFC has designed the global system like a house of cards. It's fragile by design because fragility ensures obedience because everyone's scared. They depend on keeping everyone just one crisis away from desperation. That's the logic of too big to fail. That's the only way that too big to fail can be rationalized. But creating sufficiency zones creates insulation. That builds lifeboats for the people before a flood. When the next collapse hits, and it will, whether it's economic, environmental, or geopolitical, these communities will not fall along with the rest. Those communities, self-sufficiency communities, well, that's the nightmare scenario for the empire. It's a nightmare scenario for them, for there to be pockets of the world that stay upright while everyone else goes down. That's the last thing they want to see. Because then from that moment on, people are going to ask the forbidden question. If those people in those little communities over there could survive, why couldn't we survive when we're attached to the empire? And no empire can survive that question because it's a question they can't answer. So like I said, BRICS and the developing spheres of influence in our parts of the world are partnering with the OCGFC. They are partnering with them. They're partnering with predators. And that's incredibly risky because we all know that the Black Rocks and the State Streets and the vanguards of the world are not our allies and never will be. By building sufficiency zones, we can actually help our countries, help our governments outmaneuver the inevitable attempts of the OCGFC to coerce and control, because you know that's what they're going to do. You know they're going to do that. These are piranhas, not dolphins. As soon as our spheres of influence get stabilized and get consolidated, well, you know as well as I do that the OCGFC are going to try and take over. They're going to try and take over those spheres of influence, either by coercion or manipulation. And if we have segmented our national economies into multiple layers of sufficiency zones, then that will be much less viable for them. We can actually help make our economies autonomous, and that will shield our governments from OCGFC machinations. The sufficiency zone idea is not a government initiative. It is not a development project. It is a civilizational response, and anyone can begin because it's from the ground up. The first step is not to seek permission. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait for reform or foreign aid or whatever. You don't have to wait for the right time. The right time is when you understand that nothing is coming to save you but your own discipline, your own ethics, your own people. And anyone who says that it cannot be done before it's even been tried, well, they're only saying that because they know that once it is tried and once it is done or once it is even begun, it will be unstoppable.